The end of disgraced royal Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's life of entitlement.
I'd like to see the police do the right thing.
Family ties in the royal household have always been complicated, but few stories stirred more curiosity than Prince Philip's uneasy relationship with his son, Prince Andrew. For years, questions surrounded why the Duke of Edinburgh chose to keep his distance. Now, before his death, Prince Philip finally revealed the real reason he refused to live with Andrew, and it's far more personal than anyone imagined. What truth did the late prince carry all those years in silence? Join us as we uncover why Prince Philip finally admitted the painful truth about his decision to stay away from Prince Andrew. An unseen struggle. When you picture Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip together, you probably imagine a steady couple who stayed side by side for decades. That image is true in one sense, but it hides how their partnership was shaped from the very start by distance and by choices that were never simple. Philip and Elizabeth first crossed paths in 1934 at a relative's wedding in England. She was 8, he was 13. He impressed people as a confident young naval cadet. She impressed people as a shy little girl who watched him with interest. It was an ordinary royal moment that lodged in both their memories. Later, in 1939, a teenage Elizabeth visited Dartmouth Naval College and saw Philip again. He showed her around, he teased her, and she experienced something closer to being seen than she had before. They started writing to each other over the years, notes that read more like friendly letters than formal declarations. After the war, when the world was trying to stitch itself back together, Philip proposed. Their engagement came in July 1947, and they married on November 20th, 1947 at Westminster Abbey. It symbolized renewal and felt like hope for a country recovering from war. To marry Elizabeth, Philip gave up parts of himself that mattered. He renounced his Greek and Danish princely titles. He took British nationality, and he adopted the surname Mountbatten, drawn from his maternal family. The government made him Duke of Edinburgh before the wedding. But those new titles did not replace a life already lived. Philip had been raised to find his place in the Navy, to have a job where command and routine defined him, and where action made identity clear. Marriage moved him from a life of personal purpose into a role that required him to step back, sometimes literally. When Elizabeth became queen on February 6, 1952, the change tightened. Philip's naval life slowed and then stopped because the monarchy called for a different kind of service. His role became consort, a position with rules and limits, one that asked him to support from the wings. For a man used to the authority of a captain, that required compromise, and sometimes it felt like a loss. Friends and staff later described him as devoted and direct, someone who loved the Queen deeply, but who also needed his own space to breathe and work. They did not become distant out of dislike. Rather, living apart in rhythm and routine became the way the couple made their marriage work. Philip found refuge in projects, in workshops, in outdoor pursuits that gave him room to be himself. Elizabeth carried the public burden, and she accepted a husband who needed his own quiet. That pattern, set early, would shape how he related to others in the family and how he guarded his private life, including his interactions with his sons. Philip's life changed in a way few could have predicted. Until then, the Navy had defined him. He rose through the ranks during the war. He found meaning in orders and routine, and those years gave him a clear identity. Then the monarchy asked him to trade that life for a role that came with rules rather than command, a role that demanded support instead of leadership. He did it out of love, duty, and respect for the institution that now needed him, but the change left a mark. The first, most obvious loss was professional. Philip left behind a career in which his rank and actions mattered. In the Navy, he had authority, he had a crew that depended on him, and he had missions that tested him. As consort, his days filled with ceremonial duties, private briefings, and the kind of public appearances that require constant attention to image. That switch did not erase his skill as a leader, but it did quiet it. People who worked with him later said he never lost the manner of a commanding officer. He only had to redirect it into other projects. Protocol played a big role in that redirection. A consort has a place in the hierarchy, and protocol made that place visible every single day. He walked behind the Queen in processions, he spoke only after she had spoken, and he accepted a secondary status that palace tradition attached to the job. For someone used to giving orders, that was an adjustment that ran deeper than etiquette. It shaped how he felt about himself in public, and it influenced how he arranged his private life. At about the same time, a kind of tension that invited questions grew more obvious. How do you measure a man by the job he once had when the public asks him to be only a partner on the sidelines? That question followed Philip. It became a private ache. He handled it the way he handled many hard things, with practicality and with a touch of blunt humor. He complained sometimes. He pushed for small freedoms, but he rarely made a show of unhappiness. That restraint is one reason many people misread the distance that followed. To cope, Philip built a private life that let him act. He threw himself into causes. He backed programs that meant something to him, and he took projects where he could lead. The Duke of Edinburgh's award, for example, brought him back to a world of challenge and training, the kind of tests he once knew at sea. He used his influence to get things done, often behind the scenes, so he could feel effective again. Even so, the shift from an active career to a ceremonial role changed his living patterns. The Queen's duties came first, they shaped daily routines, and privacy became a scarce resource. Philip found his peace in small sanctuaries, workshops, and estates where he could be himself. Those choices were a survival strategy for a man who had to balance love with the loss of a life once lived fully. That struggle between public expectation and private need set the stage for the separate rhythms that would come to define much of his life with Elizabeth. Philip and Elizabeth's life of separate paths. By the time Philip reached his 90s, the rhythm of his life looked very different from that of the Queen's. What began as a practical arrangement slowly became the pattern of their marriage, one built on mutual respect and an understanding that closeness did not always require physical presence. Philip valued quiet. He liked space where he could think, read, or work with his hands without the constant weight of royal routine. For him, privacy was sanity. That search for peace found its home at Wood Farm, a modest 5-bedroom house tucked away on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. It was far simpler than Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, and that was exactly what he liked about it. There were no grand receptions, no endless line of staff, just a small team and quiet countryside. Friends said he wore casual clothes, cooked his own meals, and enjoyed life there as an ordinary man might. That simplicity was different to the Queen's world of formal engagements and state duties. Their decision to live separately was about the distance of need, not of heart. The Queen had her role, defined by duty and tradition. Philip had his, defined by action and curiosity. Living apart gave them both room to breathe. For her, it meant focus without distraction. For him, it meant privacy without pressure. Together, they found balance through separation, an understanding that love could exist within boundaries that allowed individuality. It might sound unusual to outsiders, yet those who knew them said the arrangement worked perfectly. The Queen often visited Wood Farm, especially after Philip retired from public life in 2017. He would sometimes come to Windsor or London for family events and major occasions, always fitting back in naturally, as if the rhythm between them never faltered. Theirs was not the kind of relationship that demanded constant proximity. It was rooted in decades of shared experience, loyalty, and a quiet kind of affection that didn't need to be shown for the cameras. By the time Philip officially stepped back from royal duties at age 96, the pattern of separate lives was long established. The palace described it as a retirement, but in reality, it was a continuation of how he had lived for years. He preferred being out of the public eye, surrounded by books, paintings, and the open landscape. He still received guests occasionally, often close friends, clergy, or military figures he had known for decades. But the formality that once shaped his days had softened into a peaceful routine of his own making. What some might have read as detachment was, in truth, the confidence of two people who no longer needed to prove anything to each other. Their separation reflected trust. The Queen never interfered with his choice to live at Wood Farm, and he never questioned her devotion to her duties. They spoke often, exchanged letters, and remained emotionally connected even as they maintained their separate spaces. In that balance, Philip found something that resembled freedom, while the Queen found stability. Their love endured through absence, and those who observed them later in life noticed that neither seemed to wish for things to be different. Their bond was shaped by the many challenges Philip had faced even before he met the Queen. Prince Philip's early life was marked by constant change and instability. He was born on the 10th of June 1921 on the Greek island of Corfu as Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, but by the time he was an infant, the family's world had collapsed. Political unrest in Greece forced the royal household into exile in 1922. From that moment on, Philip's childhood lacked the kind of steady home most people take for granted. He moved across countries, not by choice but by necessity, living in France, Germany, Scotland, and England, picking up languages, customs, and a strange kind of self-sufficiency as he went. Schooling became a patchwork, too. He attended a series of small schools before arriving at Gordonstoun in Scotland, a boarding school famous for toughness, outdoor training, and a curriculum that prized character over comfort. At Gordonstoun, he learned to take responsibility, to lead, and to meet physical challenge with calm. Those lessons stuck and gave him tools to shape a life out of fragments. They also gave him outlets for energy he could not spend at home, where family life had been anything but steady. Behind the routines of travel and schooling was a family story that left deep marks. During the 1930s, his mother, Princess Alice of Battenberg, suffered serious mental health problems, and at times, she was institutionalized. That absence of maternal steadiness was painful, and it forced Philip into early maturity. His father, Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, withdrew from family life, spending long stretches away in the south of France. In practice, Philip grew up surrounded by tutors, guardians, and relatives, rather than by parents who were present and consistent. There is a quieter side to this story that helps explain later choices about living apart, constant movement, and the lack of a lasting home plant, and a need for privacy, a hunger for places where a person can retreat without obligation. For Philip, that retreat had to feel practical, not ornamental. He shunned show for comfort, and he preferred space where he could tinker, think, and be alone with his work. That preference was survival. By the time he left school, Philip had learned to mask hurt with humor, to take orders without surrendering self, and to channel restlessness into action. Those traits led him toward a life that prized duty and skill, a life where identity came from what you did rather than who you were born to be. And that path points directly to the place he would later call his calling, a life of purpose and independence. Prince Philip's decision to join the Royal Navy in 1939 was the moment his life gained direction. For the first time, he found an environment that rewarded discipline, action, and skill rather than lineage. The Navy gave him purpose and belonging, a world built on merit instead of title. At sea, he was not a displaced prince or a royal exile. He was simply an officer among others, judged by performance and courage. During the Second World War, Philip served with distinction in both the Mediterranean and the Pacific. He took part in dangerous operations, earned respect from his peers, and developed a sense of identity rooted in service rather than privilege. The Navy was where his restless energy met structure, and where the lessons of his difficult childhood turned into strengths. Those years also shaped his idea of manhood and meaning. Naval life demanded teamwork, sacrifice, and command. These were all things that made sense to him in a way royal protocol never could. On a ship, he had clear duties, clear results, and a community that worked by rules of competence, not ceremony. It was the one place where he felt entirely himself. But when the war ended and duty called him back to royal life, the contrast was sharp. Marriage to Princess Elizabeth brought new purpose but also new limits. The transition from naval officer to royal consort was not smooth. The man who had thrived on purpose and independence now had to walk behind his wife in public, bound by centuries of tradition that left little room for his natural authority. The Navy had shown him who he could be, but royal life reminded him of who he was expected to be. It was not resentment so much as adaptation. For Philip, the Navy was the foundation of his identity, the place that taught him to go through both storms and solitude. And when public life grew heavy, it remained his compass and a reminder of the life where he had first found meaning and control. And then there was the question of what that purpose would look like Once duty to the crown replaced duty to the fleet. He never wanted a crown for its own sake, but once duty parked him at the center of royal life, Philip made it work on his own terms. The palace asked for Polish and presence, and he gave both. Still, the man who had been forged by exile, boarding school, and naval life kept a private toolkit he returned to again and again. He used hands, ideas, and stubborn curiosity to carve out a life that felt like his, even when the world expected him to be someone else. Philip loved how things worked. Engines, radios, new gadgets, even complex charity programs caught his attention the same way a good ship's engine might catch a sailor. He liked solving problems with tools, not speeches, and he liked people who did the same. That practical taste pushed him into industrial and technological interests long before those topics became polite royal conversation. He visited factories, asked direct questions, and pushed engineers to explain ideas plainly. His bluntness could offend, but it also got results. He also cared about the natural world. From the 1960s onward, he supported conservation efforts, and in 1981 he accepted the presidency of the World Wildlife Fund, a role he held until 1996. That work suited him because it mixed science with action, research with projects that could be measured and managed. He could commission a study, back a field program, and watch something change. It gave him control, and it gave him meaning. Outside official life, he found freedom in hobbies that felt honest. Carriage driving became one of those escapes. It gave him speed, skill, and a kind of showmanship that did not need reporters to make it true. He loved to tinker in workshops. He enjoyed mechanical challenges, and he liked the focused, physical work that left you tired and satisfied. Those activities grounded him when ceremony left him lightheaded. When engagements piled up and protocol narrowed his options, he leaned on patronages and charities where he could act, not just be seen. He supported dozens of organizations, often taking personal interest in their leadership and outcomes. The Duke of Edinburgh's award, set up in the 1950s, let him channel his belief in challenge and skill into something that trained young people. It was the sort of program he liked because it rewarded effort rather than pedigree. Here's the point that shaped the rest of his life. Philip did not reject royal life. He reshaped it where he could. He accepted that his public role required restraint, but he refused to become only a figurehead. He found places to lead, and he built private routines that satisfied a need for independence. That balance kept him from breaking, and it kept the marriage alive in a form that suited both partners. His practical instincts sometimes clashed with palace expectations. Tradition wanted him visible and proper, while temperament wanted him private and useful. That tension softened into duties in public, projects in private, moments of strict protocol followed by time at Wood Farm or in a workshop. Over decades, this pattern explained more than personality. It explained choices about space and distance, why he chose retreats, and why he guarded his privacy so carefully. That story of a man who adapted without surrendering sets the stage for how his family life unfolded and how his marriage to Elizabeth came to balance public duty with private truth. Behind the formal portraits was a marriage that endured challenge, change, and time itself. Their family began soon after the wedding. Charles arrived in 1948, Anne 2 years later, then Andrew in 1960, and Edward in 1964. Each child grew up in a world where formality met affection, and where the family schedule often followed the monarchy's demands. Philip's approach as a father was strict but deeply invested. He believed in resilience, self-discipline, and the kind of education that built character more than comfort. Elizabeth's manner was gentler, shaped by duty and patience. Together, they formed a partnership that reflected both strength and space. Their marriage stretched across continents, duties, and decades, surviving changes that would have undone many couples. Over his lifetime, Philip completed more than 22,000 solo engagements and held hundreds of patronages. From small local events to international tours, he represented the monarchy with directness and efficiency. After retirement, his health became more fragile. Hospital visits increased, doctors treated infections and heart issues, and the public saw him less and less. Even so, he kept to the same practical habits. He didn't look for sympathy. He preferred to manage pain and stay purposeful. At the heart of the story is the question why Philip preferred to live apart from others in the family, and why he reportedly declined to live with Prince Andrew at times. The short answer is there is no public confession from Philip saying he refused to live with Andrew for any single reason. What we do have are years of behavior that explain the choice without a dramatic statement. He had always guarded space. He had always needed projects and places where he could be himself. Wood Farm gave him that, while palace life demanded visibility and constant attendance. So why would living with Andrew be different? Andrew's life, in later years, drew attention and controversy, and that would have brought noise and scrutiny into any shared household. In his final years, the themes of his life grew clearer. Duty remained central, but so did independence. He accepted help when he needed it. He welcomed family visits on his terms, and he kept his routines as much as health would allow. His death on 9th of April 2021 and funeral on 17th April 2021 at Windsor Castle closed a public life. Yet the way he lived those last years tells us more about private survival than public image. Philip's choices about where to live, who to welcome under his roof, and how to spend his last days were part of a consistent pattern. They show a man shaped by displacement and service, who learned to guard calm as fiercely as others guard honor. What do you think his story says about love, duty, and freedom inside the royal family? How much of our own choices are shaped by the need for independence versus the need to belong? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.